Phoenix has been set up there immerse.
So the subject for tonight is the Golem, and I came across this for an article in Moment magazine, which will be the second one we read because it actually takes sort of a perspective on the Golem that I've never heard of, and is very interesting. So the first article that I'd like to go through with you is the article from Wikipedia, and I will pop that up on the screen. And
There we go.
okay, there you are. Okay. Okay. So again, article from Wikipedia on Golem, and who would like to read? Go ahead, Ken.
A golem is an animated anthropomorphic being in Jewish folklore, which is created entirely from inanimate matter, usually clay or mud. The most famous golem narrative involves Judah Loew ben Bezalel, the late 16th century rabbi of Prague. According to Moment magazine, the golem is a highly mutable metaphor with seemingly limitless symbolism. It can be a victim or villain, man or woman, or sometimes both. Over the centuries, it has been used to connote war, community, isolation, hope, and despair.
So that article is what we'll read second. We'll just see how quickly
For the
we go.
moment, okay.
Okay.
In modern popular culture, the word has become generalized, and any crude anthropomorphic creature devised by a sorcerer may be termed a golem. There may be metal golems such as Talos or stone golems, for example, in Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay. Anybody familiar with Dungeons and Dragons and the connection with Golem? I am utterly unfamiliar with it. Is that
My kids did.
okay? Okay. Let's go to etymology.
The word golem occurs in the Bible in Psalms 139:16, which uses the word golemi, my golem, my light form, raw material to connote the unfinished human being before God's eyes. The Mishnah uses the term to refer to someone who is unsophisticated. Seven characteristics are in an uncultivated person and seven in a learned one.
Okay. And
In modern
for
Hebrew,
those of
golem
you
is
that can just interject, it's Shiva Devarim Begolem. The word golem is used in that, and I'm not sure where that quote is from. Okay, modern Hebrew.
in modern Hebrew, golem is used to mean dumb, helpless, or pupa. Similarly, it is often used today as a metaphor for a stupid person or other entity that serves a man under controlled conditions, but is hostile to him in other circumstances. Golem passed into Yiddish as goylem, meaning someone who is lethargic or in a stupor.
Okay. And pupa here, I actually don't know what they mean by it. I, let's see if I can do a, well, I'm not gonna, I can,
Rabbi,
yeah, an insect in immature form. Yeah, so when you look in the mention in the Psalms, it's sometimes translated golem as embryo or a person before being born. Yes, Erwin.
yeah, I just want to mention that uh, Isaac Isaac Bersh, Isaac how
Besheva
you call
Singer.
it Bershev wrote about Golem, and he got a Nobel Prize winner. Also, Kafka wrote about
Yeah,
and
we're going to
Elie
see a long
Wiesel.
list. Yes, we are going to see a
Yeah,
long list of folks that
no, but what I want to say is that all these writers, when they write about Golem, they don't write that he is a dumb person. Most of it writes that he is a slow kind of person,
yeah, I
not
think
a
we're going to
dumb.
we're going to see different
Yeah,
Golem
because it's a
stories.
wrong character. It's a wrong characterization when they say that he is a dumb person.
Well, what they're really saying here is that in modern Hebrew, that's what the word means, and my modern Hebrew isn't sufficient to affirm or deny that idea. So I will take the author's word for it. Let's see. And okay, let's read the history of golems.
History, the earliest stories. The oldest stories of golems date to early Judaism. In the Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin 38b, Adam is initially created as a golem when his dust is kneaded into a shapeless husk. Like Adam, all golems are created from mud by those close to divinity, but no anthropogenic golem is fully human. Early on, the main disability of the golem is its inability to speak. Sanhedrin 65b describes Rava creating a man, Gavra, whom he then sends to Rav Zera. Zera speaks to the man, but he does not answer, whereupon Zera says, "You were created by the sages, return to your dust."
Yeah, so you can imagine clearly in the story of the Garden of Eden, we have God forming the man out of the dust of the earth, and naming, and he forms the Adam out of the Adamah. There's a pun in the Hebrew, Adam, the man. Probably it means the human. It later becomes treated like a proper name, but it's formed out of the Adamah, the earth. So it's sort of natural. It's sort of natural to think of the golem in the same way as being formed out of mud. Okay, let's continue.
How
During
would
the middle,
Hold on, go ahead, Stephen.
how would there have been mud at the time of the creation of Adam? Because it's right after God separates the water from the sea. It has had
No. There's two stories.
combined.
You're mixing up the stories. So in Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis chapter 2, the first half of verse 4, you have a story of creation that if it was being made into a movie, it would be filmed from space. We have, formation of light, the separation of the waters below, waters above, and creating the creepy crawly things and separating the land from the seas and so on and so on and so on. And God in that first section, in that first description of creation, is always referred to as Elohim. In the middle of verse 4, remember the verses are chapters and verses are a later addition. In the middle of verse 4, we find the earth is empty and void again, and nothing had grown, and waters start flowing. And I don't remember all the sequence, but then God forms the Adam from the Adamah, and the grasses start growing, and the animals start crawling around, and Adam names them. So there are two completely separate stories of creation, and in the second story, God is referred to as Adonai Elohim. So of course the scholars that believe in different authorship of sections of the Torah ascribe the first section is actually P text, and the second section is actually J text. But and that story, if we were filming it, it would be up close and personal with God forming this man from the Adamah. But I think even in that story, the rivers are flowing, so there's water flowing. But yeah, it's very hard to reconcile. The rabbis do it, but it's very hard to reconcile as one continuous story. Okay, I think we are up to in the Middle Ages.
During the Middle Ages, passages from the Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Formation, were studied as a means to create and animate a golem, although little in the writings of Jewish mysticism supports this belief. The earliest known written account of how to create a golem can be found in Sodai Razaya by Eliezer ben Judah of Worms, who lived in the late 12th and early 13th century.
So just to kind of put time dates on this, anything that's in the Talmud is going to be written before about the 500s or 5 and 600s. So now we're moving into the 1200s and beyond. Okay.
It was believed that golems could be activated by an ecstatic experience induced by the ritual use of various letters of the Hebrew alphabet, forming a Shem, any one of the names of God, wherein the Shem was written on a piece of paper and inserted in the mouth or into the forehead of a golem. In some tales, including certain stories of the Helm and Prague golems, a word such as emet, truth, is inscribed on the golem, sometimes on its forehead. In this example, the golem could then be deactivated by removing the aleph, thus changing the inscription from truth to death.
Yeah,
Met being
so
death.
here you look at the word, I know it's pretty small. You look at the word emet, aleph, mem, taf, and if you take away the aleph, you just have mem and taf, so, which spells death or dead. So that's fun. Okay.
One source creates Solomon ben Gabirol, who lived in the 11th century, with creating a golem, possibly female, for household chores. A legend also existed claiming that Samuel of Speyer created a golem in the 12th century.
And something
In
to look forward to in the second article about this female golem is it, I'll use the word, is it kosher to have sex with a female golem? I know you'll be sitting on the edges of your chair until you
Which
how that.
also have something made out of mud doing your household cleaning would be counterproductive.
Something what? Oh, yes. Yeah. But, think of Roomba robots, okay? They're pretty close to golems.
Yeah, but they're not made out of mud. They're made...
Well, you
My
take
point.
it back. I don't know. I mean, everything basically comes from the earth, right? The ore, and it's smelted. Okay. 1625.
In 1625, Joseph Delmedigo wrote that many legends of this sort are current, particularly in Germany. The Golem of Helm, the oldest description of the creation of a golem by a historical figure, is included in a tradition connected to Rabbi Eliyahu of Helm, 1550 to 1583. A Polish Kabbalist writing in about 1630 to 1650 reported the creation of a golem by Rabbi Eliyahu thusly. And I have heard in a certain and explicit way from several respectable persons that one man living close to our time, whose name is R. Eliyahu, the master of the name, who made a creature out of matter, Hebrew golem, and form, Hebrew tzurah. And it performed hard work for him for a long period. And then, in the name of Emet, was hanging upon his neck until he finally removed it for a certain reason, the name from his neck, and it turned to dust. A similar account was reported by a Christian author, Christoph Arnold, in 1674.
Okay. Moving forward
Rabbi
100
Jacob,
years.
Rabbi Jacob Emden, who died in 1776, elaborated on the story in a book published in 1748. As an aside, I'll mention here what I heard from my father's holy mouth regarding the golem created by his ancestor, the Gaon R. Eliyahu Baal Shem of blessed memory. When the Gaon saw that the
Just to
Gaul,
point out,
the
wherever you
Gaul,
see the R, it means rabbi.
okay, Rabbi, okay. When the Gaon saw that the golem was growing larger and larger, he feared that the golem would destroy the universe. He then removed the holy name that was embedded on his forehead, thus causing him to disintegrate and return to dust. Nonetheless, when he was engaged in extracting the holy name from him, the golem injured him, scarring him on the face.
And I'll just mention, Rabbi, I didn't do, for this purpose, look up Emden, but I remember coming across Emden and when I was writing my thesis, and he was a pretty rational, respected rabbi. I mean, he wasn't. I don't think he was particularly known as a Kabbalist, but it is interesting how Judaism doesn't seem to be shy of delving into these kinds of stories. Okay.
According to the Polish Kabbalists, the legend was known to several persons, thus allowing us to speculate that the legend had indeed circulated for some time before it was committed to writing, and consequently we may assume that its origins are to be traced to the generation immediately following the death of Rabbi Eliyahu, if not earlier.
Okay, and now we move onto. I mean, I always thought this was really the only Golem story, the Golem of Prague. And if you go to Prague as a tourist, virtually every store will have little keychains and images and statues of the Golem that you too can buy. I probably even have a book about that somewhere here.
The classic narrative, The Golem of Prague. The most famous Golem narrative involves Judah Lo ben Bezalel, the late 16th century rabbi of Prague, also known as the Maharal, who reportedly created a golem out of clay from the banks of the Vltava River and brought it to life through rituals and Hebrew incantations to defend the Prague ghetto from anti-Semitic attacks and pogroms. Depending on the version of the legend, the Jews in Prague were to be either expelled or killed under the rule of Rudolph II, the Holy Roman Emperor. The golem was called Joseph and was known as Yosale.
Yeah, so just it would probably be pronounced Yosef and Yosala.
Yosala. Okay.
Mhm.
He was said to be able to make himself invisible and summon spirits from the dead. Rabbi Lo deactivated the golem on Friday evenings by removing the Shem from the Sabbath or Saturday, before the Sabbath began, so as to let it rest on Sabbath.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pronounced that correctly. I probably would have mispronounced it because I was thinking of it as the letter Shin, but you're absolutely right. And one of the other when you read that the first time, Shem means name. So evidently, and I think the text now makes more sense to me, that by writing one of the names of God, that is what activated the golem.
If you can activate and deactivate by adding and removing letters, in Hebrew, then in English, you could make your, since golem spelled backwards is me-log.
Yes. You try it at home and let us know how it works out, Stephen. Okay.
On Friday evening, Rabbi Lo forgot to remove the Shem and feared that the golem would desecrate the Sabbath. A different story tells of a golem that fell in love and, when rejected, became the violent monster seen in most accounts. Some versions have the golem eventually going on a murderous rampage. The rabbi then managed to pull the Shem from his mouth and immobilize him in front of the synagogue, whereupon the golem fell in pieces. The golem's body was stored in the attic, Geniza, of the old new synagogue, where it would be restored to life again if needed.
Okay. So again, the a Geniza is a place where you store documents. If you have documents with, I think there are 7 names of God or 7 words that refer to God that you should not erase. And so when you've written them and you no longer have use for that object or that sheet of paper or parchment or book, there are 2 things you can do with it. One is you can bury it in a Jewish cemetery. And the second is you can just store it away and let somebody else worry about it, I guess with the idea that eventually it will just turn to dust. And the word for that kind of storage facility is Geniza, comes from the concept of genuz, which means to hide away. And the old synagogue in Prague is now called the Alt New Synagogue, the Old New Synagogue, because when it was first created, I'm sure it was called the New Synagogue, but I think it's from the 1600s or so. So it's pretty old at the moment. And I've been there several times. Alan, and then Ken and Patricia.
This is just a little Temple of Elohim trivia, but it reminded me that if you knew, or the original building that the temple bought was from a church,
mm-hmm.
And in the upper left-hand corner behind the ark, in the behind this, not on the street, not in the room, there was a tiled baptismal font that had been used by the church. And what we did when we had older prayer books and things that couldn't be repaired, I guess happened from time to time, books like that, that's where we stored them. I don't remember whether we ever had a ceremony to bury them.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. And actually the synagogue that I worked in Camarillo, which is a functioning church, does actually have a baptismal behind it, which I think can still be used. Ken.
Well, I just want a little aside on our tour of Europe last year with the cantor. We actually went to the Old New Synagogue in Prague, although they didn't take us to the Geniza, so I can't personally attest to whether there's a golem there or
Oh,
not.
you'll see in the next article, in the next paragraph, no one's allowed to go there.
Oh,
So you went through Prague. I had forgotten that.
yes, yeah, we did.
Yeah, great, wonderful city. My son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter live there. Stephen.
Oh,
Why would the Golem not keeping Shabbos be an issue? Because it doesn't have a Jewish mother. It hasn't converted. It's not Jewish.
No, it's not a person. So
so why is it obligated to, well, why?
it's in some sense a machine, but you'll have to ask Rabbi Lowe.
But a machine running on Shabbos is okay as long as you turn it on before Shabbos starts. You don't have
So
you don't have to turn off your machine.
I agree with your rabbinic thinking.
But
By the way, one interesting thing which I just started researching tonight, just a few minutes before we started, is the role of the fable of the Golem on elements in Jewish law which have to do with cloning. So the question is, and maybe we'll talk about it next, if I can find some. I think I found some interesting articles. They're a little too detailed, but in cloning, basically, humans are creating another human, an entity, or even growing cells, growing skin cells, growing, hopefully someday artificial heart or kidneys or whatever. And I remember reading, and I was trying to find sources on this. I remember reading that in the early decisions of the rabbis, as this technology was being developed, they actually went to the story of the Golem and said, since Rabbi Lowe was not criticized, and these people that created the Golems were not criticized as breaking Jewish law, therefore it must be okay to grow, let's say, skin cells or liver cells or maybe even new human beings. We can joke about how Jewish law applies to this, but what's really interesting to me is that the legal minds in Judaism are in fact looking at these stories for insight into how to make decisions on real issues in medical technology.
Ooh.
Okay, Ken, let's continue.
Rabbi Lowe then forbade anyone except his successors from going into the attic. Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, a successor of Rabbi Lowe, reportedly wanted to go up the steps to the attic when he was chief rabbi of Prague to verify the tradition. Rabbi Landau fasted and immersed himself in a mikveh, wrapped himself in phylacteries and a prayer shawl, and started ascending the steps. At the top of the steps, he hesitated and then came immediately back down, trembling and frightened. He then reenacted Rabbi Lowe's original warning. According to legend, the body of Rabbi Lowe's golem still lies in the synagogue's attic. When the attic was renovated in 1883, no evidence of the golem was found. Some versions of the tale state that the golem was stolen from the Geniza and entombed in a graveyard in Prague's Zizkov district, where the Zizkov television tower now stands. A recent legend tells of a Nazi agent ascending to the synagogue attic, dying under suspicious circumstances thereafter. The attic is not open to the general public.
That's why you couldn't get in to see it, Ken.
Right, yeah. Some Orthodox Jews believe that the Maharal did actually create a golem. The evidence for this belief has been analyzed from an Orthodox Jewish perspective by Schneier Z. Lyman.
Okay, so now I'm not going to suggest we read this whole next section because it talks about the writers that may have contributed to the Prague or developing the Prague Golem story. Yeah, I just don't think it's all that interesting. But let's go to the Golem of Vilna.
Golem of Vilna. A similar tradition relates to the Vilna Gaon or the saintly genius from Vilnius. Rabbi Chaim Volozhin, a Lithuanian, reported in an introduction to Sifra de Tsenuta that he once presented to his teacher, the Vilna Gaon, 10 different versions of a certain passage in the Sefer Yitzhara and asked the Gaon to determine the correct text. The Gaon immediately identified one version as the accurate rendition of the passage. The amazed student then commented to his teacher that, with such clarity, he should easily be able to create the live human. The Gaon affirmed Rabbi Chaim's assertion and said that he once began to create a person when he was a child, under the age of 13, but during the process, he received a sign from heaven ordering him to desist because of his tender age.
And I'll just comment, the Vilna Gaon was the head of the Miknagdim. There were two major schools of Jewish mystics that come out in the 1700s. One is the Hasidic school, which is created by the Baal Shem Tov, which are very, very mystical, and the Baal Shem Tov tells all these stories and gets away from sort of the discipline of just detailed learning, very Messiah obsessed. And at the other end is the Litvaks, which are actually called the Mitnagdim, which means those who are opposed. Who are they opposed to? They're opposed to the Hasidic Jews, and they are very scholarly and intense. But they're both, major movements in the ultra-Orthodox world, the Haredim.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
How you call it? Also, it was a very mystic rabbi called the Satmar Rebbe in northern Hungary, and it's still thousands of people go there once a year to when his yard site is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what you have is the Satmar is one of the movements that develops out of the Hasidic movement. So you have the Baal Shem Tov is the originator of the Hasidic movement, and then his students spread out over Europe, and each one sets up a sect of the Hasidic movement in their town. So Satmars are one, the Lubavitch is another one, and my impression is there may be a dozen or 20 such Hasidic movements, and Satmar is definitely one. Okay, let's go to the theme of hubris.
Theme of hubris. The existence of a golem is sometimes a mixed blessing. Golems are not intelligent. If commanded to perform a task, they will perform the instructions literally. In many depictions, golems are inherently perfectly obedient. In its earliest known modern form, the golem of Helm became enormous and uncooperative. In one version of the story, the rabbi had to resort to trickery to deactivate it, whereupon it crumbled upon its creator and crushed him. A similar theme of hubris is seen in Frankenstein, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, and some other stories in popular culture, such as The Terminator. The theme manifests itself in RUR, Karel Čapek's 1921 play that coined the term robot. The play was written in Prague, and while Čapek denied that he modeled the robot after the golem, many similarities are seen in the plot.
Yeah, so we have over and over again, we have these stories of people creating artificial intelligence, you could say, and then they kind of lose control of them. Okay, let's see, Czech Republic.
The Golem is a popular figure in the Czech Republic. The 1915 novel by Gustav Meyrink, The Golem, was briefly popular and did much to keep the imagination about the Golem going. Several restaurants and other businesses have names that make reference to the creature. A Czech strongman, Rene Richter, goes by the nickname Golem, and a Czech monster truck outfit calls itself the Golem Team. Abraham Ackerman preceded his article on human automatism in the contemporary city with a short satirical poem on a pair of golems turning human.
Okay, I think we're getting close to as much as I want to read on this, but let's read a little more.
Clay boy variation. A Yiddish and Slavic folktale is the clay boy, which combines elements of the golem and the gingerbread man, in which a lonely couple makes a child out of clay with disastrous or comical consequences. In one common Russian version, an older couple whose children have left home make a boy out of clay and dry him by their hearth. The clay boy comes to life. At first, the couple is delighted and treats him like a real child, but the clay boy does not stop growing and eats all their food, then all their livestock, and then the clay boy eats his parents.
Oi, oi, oi.
The clay boy rampages through the village until he is smashed by a quick-thinking goat.
Yep. Where are quick-thinking goats when we need them? Yeah. So let's read one more sentence, and then I think we'll skip a lot of this.
Golem in popular culture. In popular culture, the term golem is often used to refer to any magically created human figure rather than specifically a humanoid formed by Kabbalistic means.
So you all should have this article, and if you want to see all the references in film and television and literature and tabletop and video games and music, you have them there, and then there's notes. Okay, so now there's a really, I would say, an interesting article in Moment Magazine about the Golem, and would someone else like to read, or I don't mind reading. Anybody else want to take a shot at it? Okay, hearing none. So this sort of brings things up to the current. And actually, yeah, this is 2017, so it's not exactly current. Last September, during the final dramatic months of the U.S. presidential election, an exhibit on the Golem opened at the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And probably among the works of art and historic artifacts, the show included a baseball cap from the Trump presidential campaign stamped with the words, "Make America Great Again." The caption quoted a 2015 Canadian Broadcasting Corporation news article referring to the then candidate as the golem that grew uncontrollable and threatened the entire universe. That's why he's mad at the Canadians.
That's 8 years ago. That's interesting.
Yeah. So Martina Ludicky, one of the exhibit curators, explained that the Trump hat was included to show that each generation recreates the golem as a reflection of what's happening at that time. In Jewish folklore, a golem is a powerful but erratic humanoid form from the earth and brought to life through Kabbalistic magic. While the golem is often created with good intentions, or even to save the Jews, ultimately it runs amok and must be destroyed. Indeed, much like the amorphous clay from which it is usually formed, the golem is a highly mutable metaphor with seemingly limitless symbolism. It can be victim or villain, Jew or non-Jew, man or woman, sometimes both. Over the centuries, it has been used to connote war, community, isolation, hope, and despair. Despite the meanings the golem has acquired over the years, its origins are fairly simple. The Hebrew word galmi means an unformed mass, first appears in Psalms. In a later midrash about human creation, Adam is said to have been a golem, a body without soul, until the fourth hour of his existence when God breathed life into him. Though the concept of golem as a creature artificially brought to life goes back to the Talmud, the term doesn't come into modern usage until much later. And there's a story about that we already read about. You see, I want to just jump down, and there's an image. I think this is the typical souvenir you find in Prague. Yeah, souvenir figure of a Prague golem. Golems were mostly male, though the occasional appearance of she-golems cast an intriguing light on gender roles of the time. The Andalusian poet and philosopher Solomon ibn Gabriel supposedly created a golem maidservant to cook his meals and to keep house for him. The 16th century mystical text Shnei Luchot Habrit, which means the two tablets of the covenant, by Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz, tells of the creation of a beautifully silent female golem, a golem quasi-concubine for sexual relations. When accused of lewdness, Rabbi Horowitz defended himself by saying that since golems are not born from men's semen or grown in a woman's womb, sex with a golem is not a sin. So that should be a big relief to those
Wouldn't it?
folks that buy sex toys on the.
Yeah, wouldn't that kind of what I was about to say, which is, wouldn't it, if it's not, if the point is that the golem is not considered a person or an animal, but rather an inanimate object, wouldn't this then be a form of masturbation? And
Yes. So I guess it depends on whether you spill your seed needlessly or not. And the text thankfully doesn't get into this level of detail.
Rabbi,
Yes, I agree.
when I went to Israel and I went to the how you call it, the big dome where the book of
The
something,
dome, yeah, the shrine of the book where the Dead Sea Scrolls are.
where they store the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Mhm.
and there was a little exhibit, miniature clay man, looked like man. Apparently, the women used it to pray for fertility, and it looked like very much like this little figure what you showed.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know,
They
I
didn't
often
call
say, yeah, they were household idols, and we read even in the Torah. I think it's, can't remember if it's Rachel or Rebecca that has a bunch of household idols that she hides, and then when she has to move, she gathers them. One thing you can say about commandments, when we are commanded not to do something like worship idols, you can bet that people are doing it. It's just
I don't have any.
okay. Okay, golems are not solely about good times. There's a darker side to the tradition. With the rise of anti-Semitism in the late Renaissance period and greater dissension within Jewish communities, a dramatic new element emerges: danger. For the first time, the golem is no longer simply a passive servant laboring for its master, but a threatening and ominous figure. And it talks about Judah Low creates a golem to defend the Jewish community. It saves the day. Whoops. My computer now is telling me stories about Golem. Hold on a second. Whoop. Because it evidently it didn't. Google interpreted me as asking a question. So as we read, the Golem saves the day, but the story's end reflects Jewish insecurities about power. Lo loses control of the monster and must destroy it. In one version, the Golem turns back to mud and falls on the rabbi, killing him. Monsters mirror the anxieties and fears of society, emerging more vigorously when cultural stresses are keenest, argues University of Glasgow Jewish Studies professor Mia Spiro. You can see this vividly with the Golem. In the years between the two world wars, as Europeans grappled with massive political and social upheaval, golems turned up in both Jewish and non-Jewish fiction. One of the latter Jewish filmmakers, Paul Wegener's enormously popular 1920 horror film, The Golem: How He Came into the World, reinterpreted the Rabbi Low story in ways that mirrored the distress that afflicted post-war Germany. The film's Jewish golem is a threatening figure, reflecting Wegener's apprehension about the Jews. As I was reading this, I was thinking about, films now that we're reading and books about artificial intelligence or run amok, sort of the same idea. In sharp contrast, Jewish poet Leivik's 1921 Yiddish play Der Golem articulates Jewish anxieties about persecution. Where Wegener's golem is heartless and mechanical, Leivik's golem is needy, fearful of being alone and powerless to save the Jewish people. The golem, who's given the name Yossi by its creator, ultimately loses its mind, suggesting that madness is an appropriate response to the insanity of the times. In a line that took on new poignancy after the Holocaust, the play ends with the golem plaintively crying out, "Who will save us?" And there's actually a golem with the name Emet on its forehead, word Emet. With the founding of the State of Israel, Jews recast the golem as any enemy of the Jews. In June of 1948, at the ceremony swearing in the first group of IDF soldiers, Moshe Sharet, foreign minister for the provisional government, referred to the Arab League as a golem, created by the British. The Hebrew language press appropriated the term to describe both Arabs and Germans. Israeli journalist Hillel Danzel in the daily newspaper Devar wrote the Arab golem was a reincarnation of the prior Nazi monster. Soon after, Der Golem returned to the stage, this time reinterpreted as an urgent call for the use of Jewish physical force. Poet and literary critic Adam Kirch argues the Golem story addresses our post-Holocaust fear of insecurity, our Zionist admiration of and guilt about strength, and our 21st century obsession with technology and the ways it can go awry. I think we're almost done. The Golem remains with us, still shape-shifting in form and meaning. In recent decades, it has popped up in a range of popular media, from Superman to comic books to Michael Chabon's The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, to Quentin Tarantino's movies, Inglourious Bastards. James Sturm, creator of the popular graphic novel The Golem's Mighty Swing, believes that the Golem continues to resonate with artists and writers because the story mimics the artistic process. You create a work of art, and then it takes on a life of its own. And the Golem's allegiance is still mutable. These days, Golems are portrayed both as allies of Jews and as their enemies' entities to be embraced or overcome. Even Israel has been called the Golem. In 2002, a 2002 New York revival of Der Golem staged the play in Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip against the backdrop of the Second Intifada. In her New York Times review of the production, theater critic Alyssa Solomon wrote, has the militarily mighty Jewish state become a golem for the 21st century, promising protection, but leading to peril? Although such comparisons remain rare for Jews and non-Jews, the golem serves as a concept uniquely suited to expressing the fears and insecurities of the modern era. As Isaac Bashev Singer wrote in 1984, the Golem story appears less obsolete today than it seemed 100 years ago. After all, what are computers and robots of our times, if not golems? So, I hope you at least got a sense of this ancient mystical concept of the Golem and how the images continue to be used. And I'll find another topic next week. Paul and then Alan.
Yes, there was a movie called The Forbidden Planet. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it's a story of some men who go to this star that they don't know about. And all of a sudden they see this big monster outside and it rages at them. And the man controlling that monster is actually a very bright man who developed all this stuff on the star. And I don't know if that's a golem or not, but that sounds like what's happening.
Yeah, so I guess just a continuing theme in fiction is the story of the monster.
Yeah.
Alan.
A few months after October 7th, I found an article. It's dated a few months after October 7th, 2023, and the title is Hamas, the Islamists' Golem.
Yeah.
So they tried to develop this metaphor in the same way that we're learning about the Golem as a concept in Jewish history.
Yeah, and they mentioned Superman here, and I don't know if you know, but the authors of the Superman story are both Jewish. The names that are used, Jor-El, Kal-El, are very much Hebrew names, El being an image of God. And one of my rabbinic buddies is something of an expert on this subject, Superman and history and interpretation. And it seems like it was a messianic image for Jews of, along with Captain America and so on, of an artificial being that would, right wrongs and make the world a better place. And sent from Krypton, wherever the heck that is. But the Hebrew names sort of sneak in there, which are kind of interesting. Okay, I will try and find something of more immediate interest for next week. This is pretty obscure stuff, but if you like obscure stuff, I'm your rabbi.
Interesting.
You were waiting for the the permanent peace and release of all the hostages that was supposed to happen today, but this was a filler because that didn't happen, right?
It was supposed to happen today?
No, I'm just saying
Oh,
giving you room for the fact this wasn't a timely article. It's a
no,
good
no.
article, but you would have bumped it if the other things had happened today.
Yeah. Well, yes, yeah. If something, yeah, I have to admit, the recent days I have more time on my hands because I try and avoid watching the news, which is probably
Oh, my.
not something I should be doing, but it's
Mixed blessing.
it is a very mixed blessing. So next time we'll continue our discussion of something interesting, I promise you. And I will wish you a good evening.
The next time on Monday, are we doing it on Monday then?
Monday, we're continuing a very long series on science and religion.
Yeah, we are, okay.
Right.
Right.
And Wednesdays, I'm just finding topics.
Okay, good deal.
So take care and stay well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.